A humble farmer's son, humiliated and expelled from an elite school, returns with his grandfather in a helicopter the next day, revealing a shocking truth that leaves everyone speechless. It was just another typical morning at Oakridge Academy, an elite private school nestled in the wealthy suburbs of Seattle, Washington. The early autumn sun glinted off the school's impressive glass and stone facade as students poured through its ornate entrance gates. The academy sprawled across 12 manicured acres, its grounds more reminiscent of a university campus than a high school. Students dressed in crisp navy blazers and grey slacks or skirts moved through the polished marble hallways, some huddled in groups discussing weekend trips to Europe or ski vacations in Aspen, others frantically completing assignments on their latest MacBooks and tablets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bell chimed melodiously through hidden speakers, a custom composition by a former student who now conducted for the Seattle Symphony. Oakridge was known for producing future doctors, tech entrepreneurs, and political leaders, a reputation it protected fiercely through rigorous academics and equally rigorous admissions standards. The school's motto, "Excellence without exception," was emblazoned on banners hanging from the vaulted ceilings. For Ethan Parker, however, this morning carried a familiar weight of unease. As he walked through the grand entrance, his worn backpack slung over one shoulder, he felt the usual sideways glances from his classmates. At 17, Ethan was tall and strong, with sun-bronzed skin and thoughtful hazel eyes that had a habit of looking directly at people when they spoke, a trait that made many of his more privileged peers uncomfortable. "Nice shoes, farm boy," whispered a voice as he passed a group of seniors. "Did you get them on sale at the feed store?" Muffled laughter followed, but Ethan kept walking, eyes forward. He'd learned long ago that responding only made things worse. Ethan was different from the others at Oakridge. While they arrived in luxury SUVs and sports cars, many with personal drivers, he took the public bus from his family's small farm, 40 minutes outside the city, waking at 4:30 a.m. to complete his chores before catching the 6:15 bus. His uniform, though clean and meticulously pressed by his mother each evening, showed signs of being handed down, slight fading at the elbows of his blazer, a nearly invisible patch on his left sleeve where he'd torn it, helping his father with the tractor last spring. His hands, unlike the manicured fingers of his peers, bore calluses from early morning chores, feeding chickens, mending fences, and helping with the harvest before sunrise. These hands had set him apart yesterday in biology lab, when he'd been the only one undisturbed by the dissection, handling the scalpel with the confidence of someone who had helped birth calves and tend to injured animals. Ethan had earned his place at Oakridge through a partial academic scholarship, his natural intelligence obvious, despite his quiet demeanor. The remaining tuition represented nearly all of his parents' savings, a sacrifice they made willingly, believing education was the surest path to a better future. "Knowledge doesn't wash off like mud," his father often said. "Once you've got it, nobody can take it away." But intelligence alone couldn't shield him from the invisible barrier that separated him from the others. The barrier of wealth and social status that defined life at Oakridge Academy. Ethan navigated this world carefully, keeping to himself, focusing on his studies and counting the days until college applications were due. Stanford was his dream. They had an agricultural science program that could help him revolutionize his family's modest farm. As he made his way to his locker, Ethan spotted Madison Chen, one of the few students who had ever shown him kindness. The daughter of a renowned surgeon, Madison defied the unspoken social boundaries of Oakridge, speaking to everyone with the same genuine interest. "Morning, Ethan," she said, smiling as she organized her books. "Ready for Mrs. Harrington's calculus test?" Ethan nodded. Been studying all week. You? Same. Though I'm not sure all the derivatives in the world will help when I inherit my mum's shaky surgeon hands. She laughed, holding up fingers that trembled dramatically. Their conversation was cut short by the warning bell. As students hurried to their first classes, Ethan felt the familiar knot in his stomach tighten. First period, Advanced European History with Dr. Victoria Blackwell. Dr. Blackwell was Oakridge's most decorated faculty member, a former Oxford professor with 2 PhDs and a collection of published works that filled an entire shelf in the school library. She was also, in Ethan's experience, the most openly elitist teacher at Oakridge. She made no secret of her belief that academic excellence was intrinsically tied to cultural refinement and social standing. As Ethan slipped into his seat in the back row, he felt Dr. Blackwell's cold gaze follow him. Her silver hair was pulled into an immaculate bun, her posture perfect as she stood at the lectern. The classroom itself felt like entering another century. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and portraits of historical figures watching from ornate frames. Today, Dr. Blackwell announced, her British accent crisp in the quiet room, we will be discussing the socio-economic factors that contributed to the French Revolution. Her eyes swept the room. A period of history where those who believed themselves entitled to power and privilege were reminded, often quite graphically, of their vulnerability. Ethan opened his notebook, pen poised. Despite Dr. Blackwell's obvious disdain for him, he found her lectures fascinating. History was full of moments when the established order was upended, when those at the bottom rose to challenge those at the top. There was something comforting in that cycle, something that reminded him that today's circumstances weren't necessarily tomorrow's destiny. Little did Ethan know, as he sat taking careful notes about a revolution centuries past, that he was about to become part of a much smaller but no less dramatic upheaval of his own. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Blackwell paced methodically at the front of the classroom, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor like a metronome marking time. Her voice carried the confident cadence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. The aristocracy of pre-revolutionary France lived in a bubble of luxury and excess, she continued, gesturing to a projected image of Marie Antoinette's lavish chambers at Versailles. They were so removed from the daily struggles of the common people that they could not comprehend the depth of suffering their policies created. Ethan found himself nodding slightly. The parallels to his current surroundings weren't lost on him. While no one at Oakridge was starving, there was a similar disconnection. Students who complained about the ancient model of their luxury cars, while he worried about the farm's irrigation system breaking down before harvest. The nobility believed their position was ordained by divine right, Dr. Blackwell said, her eyes scanning the room. A birthright that separated them inherently from the peasantry. Can anyone tell me why this belief system was particularly vulnerable to collapse? Several hands shot up. Dr. Blackwell nodded toward Clayton Reynolds, the son of a tech billionaire. Mr. Reynolds, because it was based on tradition rather than merit, Clayton answered confidently. When people began questioning traditional authority structures during the Enlightenment, the whole system lost its foundation. Precisely. Dr. Blackwell smiled approvingly. The moment people began asking, why should someone rule simply because of their birth? The days of the aristocracy were numbered. Ethan raised his hand, surprising even himself. Dr. Blackwell's eyebrows arched slightly, her lips thinning to a line. After deliberately scanning the room for any other volunteers and finding none, she reluctantly acknowledged him. Mr. Parker, I think there's another factor. Ethan said, his voice quiet but steady. The aristocracy also failed because they stopped providing any real value to society. Originally, nobles were supposed to protect common people and manage land efficiently. By the time of the revolution, they were just taking without giving anything back. A flicker of annoyance crossed Dr. Blackwell's face. An interesting, if somewhat simplistic interpretation. However, I believe we should focus on the intellectual underpinnings rather than reducing complex historical movements to basic economic exchanges. Ethan felt his face flush. He'd spent hours reading supplementary texts on the French Revolution, fascinated by the interplay of social forces. With respect, Dr. Blackwell, the philosophers of the time themselves made that argument. Rousseau specifically wrote about the social contract being broken when— Mr. Parker, Dr. Blackwell interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. While I appreciate your apparent enthusiasm, perhaps we should leave the nuanced analysis to those who have demonstrated a more comprehensive understanding of historical context. Few students snickered. Ethan felt his throat tighten, but he pressed on, driven by a sense of injustice that overrode his usual caution. I've read Rousseau's social contract. His argument about the breakdown of reciprocal obligations directly supports what I'm saying. The room fell silent. Challenging Dr. Blackwell was unheard of at Oakridge. Have you indeed? Dr. Blackwell's tone dripped with condescension. She set down her pointer and approached Ethan's desk, each step deliberate. And where, may I ask, did a farmer's son encounter Rousseau? The local feed store's philosophical section, perhaps? More laughter rippled through the classroom. Ethan sat straighter, fighting the urge to look away from her piercing gaze. The school library, Dr. Blackwell, and our farm has internet access, just like everyone else in the 21st century. Dr. Blackwell's face hardened. Your insolence is noted, Mr. Parker, since you seem to believe yourself an expert on revolutionary grants. Perhaps you'd like to share with the class the primary economic policies implemented during the Reign of Terror and their specific impacts on agricultural production. It was a trap, a deliberate pivot to an obscure topic they hadn't yet covered. Ethan hesitated, searching his memory. As I suspected, Dr. Blackwell said with a thin smile. Enthusiasm is no substitute for rigorous study and cultural context, Mr. Parker. Some of your classmates have been immersed in European history and culture since childhood, spending summers touring historical sites with knowledgeable guides, attending lectures at prestigious institutions, developing the kind of nuanced understanding that cannot be gleaned from a casual reading at a farm. She turned back toward the front of the classroom. Now, as I was saying before the interruption, the law of the maximum, Ethan said quietly. Dr. Blackwell froze mid-step. Excuse me? The law of the maximum, Ethan repeated louder now. Price controls implemented in 1793. They were meant to prevent hoarding and speculation, especially for grain. But they backfired by driving farmers to hide their crops rather than sell at artificially low prices. Combined with the requisitioning policies that forced farmers to sell to the revolutionary government first, it led to even worse food shortages in Paris. The silence in the classroom deepened. Even those who had laughed earlier were watching. With wide eyes, Dr. Blackwell turned slowly, her face a mask of controlled fury. It seems you've memorized a Wikipedia article, Mr. Parker. Congratulations. Actually, came a voice from the doorway, he's precisely correct and more nuanced than most undergraduate essays I've graded on the subject. Every head turned to see Headmaster Collins standing at the door, his tall frame filling the entrance. He adjusted his glasses and gave a small nod to Dr. Blackwell. Please continue, Victoria. I was just dropping by to observe. Don't mind me. Doctor. Blackwell's composure faltered momentarily before she regained her professional demeanor. Of course, Headmaster. We were just discussing the economic policies of the terror. She turned back to the whiteboard, but not before giving Ethan a look that could have frozen fire. For the remainder of the class, Dr. Blackwell pointedly ignored Ethan, calling on every other student regardless of whether they had raised their hand. When the bell finally rang, she called out over the shuffling of books and papers, "Mr. Parker, a word." Ethan's stomach sank as his classmates filed out, a few giving him sympathetic glances. Madison mouthed, "Good luck," as she passed his desk. When the room had emptied, Dr. Blackwell walked to her desk and sat down, taking her time arranging papers before finally addressing him. "Your behavior today was disruptive and disrespectful, Mr. Parker." "I meant no disrespect, Dr. Blackwell. I was just participating in the discussion." "There is a difference between participation and contradiction," she said coldly. "You seem to forget your place here at Oakridge." "My place?" Ethan repeated, feeling a flare of indignation. "I earned my place here just like anyone else." Dr. Blackwell laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Oh, Mr. Parker, let's not delude ourselves. You are here on scholarship, a charitable gesture by this institution. Your presence is tolerated, not celebrated." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd always sensed this sentiment beneath the surface, but to hear it stated so boldly shocked him. "Oakridge Academy has a legacy to maintain," she continued. "We prepare students who come from backgrounds of achievement and refinement to take their places in the highest echelons of society. Students who understand the social graces and cultural nuances that come with proper upbringing." She looked pointedly at his calloused hands. "Not everyone belongs in such environments, and it does them no kindness to pretend otherwise." Ethan stared at Dr. Blackwell, the sting of her words burning in his chest. 18 months of suppressed frustration, of pretending not to notice the sideways glances and whispered comments, of working twice as hard to prove himself worthy. It all threatened to boil over in a single moment. "So that's what this is really about," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Not my academic performance, but where I come from." Dr. Blackwell sighed, as if dealing with a child, unable to grasp a simple concept. "Your academic performance is adequate, Mr. Parker. That's not in dispute, but Oakridge isn't merely an academic institution, it's a cultural one. We prepare students for leadership positions in society, positions that require a certain pedigree." "Pedigree," Ethan repeated, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. "You talk about me like I'm a dog at a kennel club." "Your metaphor, not mine," Dr. Blackwell replied coolly, "though I suppose it's telling that you would choose such a rustic comparison." Ethan gripped the edge of his desk, anchoring himself as the room seemed to tilt around him. He thought of his parents, his father's weathered hands showing him how to mend a fence at 5 years old, his mother staying up late helping him with science projects despite her own exhaustion from a day's work. The same parents who had scraped together every spare penny to supplement his scholarship, who believed in him without reservation. "My family may not have visited museums in Paris or attended galas at the Met," Ethan said, "but they taught me values that matter. Honesty, hard work, treating people with respect regardless of what they own or where they live." Dr. Blackwell's lips curled into a thin smile. "Charming platitudes, Mr. Parker. But the real world operates on different principles: connections, refinement, understanding the unspoken rules that govern elite spaces." She leaned forward. "Do you honestly believe you'll be able to navigate those spaces without embarrassing yourself? That Stanford will welcome you with open arms when you can't tell a dessert fork from a salad fork?" "I'll learn what I need to learn," Ethan said, his jaw tightening. "But I won't apologize for who I am or where I come from." "And that," Dr. Blackwell said, "is precisely your problem, this stubborn pride in your background." She said the word as if it were contaminated. It blinds you to your limitations. Ethan felt something shift inside him, a quiet certainty replacing the insecurity that had dogged him since his first day at Oakridge. The only limitations I have are the ones people like you try to impose on me. Dr. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. Careful, Mr. Parker, that tone borders on insubordination. It's not insubordination to stand up for myself, Ethan said, rising from his chair. You've made it clear what you think of me, but you're wrong about one thing. I do belong here. I earned my place at this school, and I won't let anyone, not even you, make me feel like I don't deserve it. Dr. Blackwell stood as well, her posture rigid. Sit down, Mr. Parker. This conversation isn't finished. It is for me, Ethan said, reaching for his backpack. The warning bell for the next period rang in the distance. I need to get to my next class. If you walk out that door, Dr. Blackwell said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, you will face serious consequences. Ethan hesitated, his hand on the strap of his backpack. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to apologize, to sit down, to endure whatever else she had to say. His scholarship, his future, everything he and his parents had sacrificed for, hung in the balance. But another voice, quieter but no less insistent, reminded him of something his grandfather used to say, "The moment you let someone convince you that you're less than them is the moment you become less than them." Ethan slung his backpack over his shoulder. I understand there will be consequences, but I also understand that respect goes both ways. Good day, Dr. Blackwell. He turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling both terrifying and liberating. Mr. Parker, Dr. Blackwell's voice cracked like a whip. If you leave this room, consider yourself suspended pending a review by the Disciplinary Committee. Ethan paused at the doorway, his hand on the frame. Without turning, he said, For what? For knowing the answer to your question? Or for refusing to be belittled because my parents grow food instead of moving money around? For insubordination and disrespect to a faculty member, Dr. Blackwell snapped. Your attitude is precisely why people from your background rarely succeed in institutions like Oakridge. Ethan felt a strange calm wash over him. My grandfather always says that when people can't attack your arguments, they attack your character. He turned to face her one last time. I'm sorry you couldn't find a better counter-argument to mine than where I come from. With that, he walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. The hallway was nearly empty, most students already in their second period classes. Ethan leaned against the wall, his heart hammering in his chest. What had he done? Years of work, of sacrifice. Had he just thrown it all away in a moment of pride? You okay? Ethan looked up to see Madison standing nearby, concern etched on her face. I don't know, he admitted. I couldn't take it anymore. Madison nodded. I heard most of it. The door isn't exactly soundproof. Ethan groaned. Great. So everyone will know by lunch. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Madison said, her voice quiet but firm. Dr. Blackwell's been doing this for years. My sister had her 3 years ago. She made a Filipino student cry by suggesting her accent made her sound uneducated. Before Ethan could respond, the classroom door swung open and Dr. Blackwell emerged, her face a mask of cold fury. In her hand was a pink slip of paper that Ethan recognized immediately. A disciplinary referral. Both of you, get to class immediately, she ordered. And Mr. Parker, report to Headmaster Collins's office after school. The disciplinary committee will decide whether your continued enrollment at Oakridge is in the best interest of this institution. Madison opened her mouth to protest, but Ethan shook his head slightly. This was his battle, not hers. I'll be there, he said simply. As Dr. Blackwell strode away, her heels echoing on the marble floor, Madison turned to Ethan. This isn't right. You should tell Headmaster Collins what really happened. Would it matter? Ethan asked. It's her, Word against mine, and everyone knows who carries more weight around here. Maybe more than you think, Madison said. Collins seemed impressed with you earlier. One moment of approval doesn't outweigh years of tradition, Ethan said, trying to keep the bitterness from his voice. Anyway, I need to call my parents. They should hear this from me before the school calls them. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Word of Ethan's confrontation with Dr. Blackwell spread through the student body with remarkable speed. By lunchtime, he had become something of a minor celebrity, the farm boy who had stood up to the school's most intimidating teacher. Some students who had never spoken to him before nodded in acknowledgement as he passed. Others watched him with a new curiosity, but Ethan took little comfort in this sudden attention. The conversation with his parents had been as difficult as he'd expected. His mother had fallen silent, and he could picture her pressing her fingers to her lips the way she did when trying not to cry. His father had asked pointed questions, his voice tight with controlled anger, not at Ethan, but at the situation. "We'll figure this out, son," his father had said finally. "Just focus on your classes for now. We'll talk more when you get home." When the final bell rang, Ethan made his way to the administrative wing. The hallways there were quieter, lined with portraits of distinguished alumni and past headmasters. Outside Headmaster Collins's office, a secretary with a sympathetic smile directed him to wait on a leather bench. 20 minutes later, the door opened and Dr. Blackwell emerged, followed by 2 other teachers who served on the disciplinary committee. None of them acknowledged Ethan as they passed. Finally, Headmaster Collins appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Parker, please come in." Ethan entered the office, which was panelled in dark wood like Dr. Blackwell's classroom, but somehow felt less oppressive. Bookshelves lined the walls, and large windows overlooked the school's central courtyard. Headmaster Collins gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I've heard Dr. Blackwell's account of what happened today," he said, sitting down and folding his hands. "I'd like to hear yours." Ethan took a deep breath and recounted the morning's events as accurately as he could, neither embellishing nor downplaying what had been said on either side. When he finished, Headmaster Collins studied him silently for a moment. "You understand that walking out after being explicitly told to remain constitutes a serious breach of conduct," he said finally. "Yes, sir. And you understand that responding to a teacher the way you did, regardless of provocation, is generally unacceptable at Oakridge." "Yes, sir." "And you understand that responding to a teacher the way you did, regardless of provocation, is generally unacceptable at Oakridge." "Yes, sir." Headmaster Collins sighed, removing his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. "The disciplinary committee has recommended your immediate expulsion, Mr. Parker." Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him, though he'd been half expecting this outcome. "I see," he managed. "Dr. Blackwell has been with Oakridge for 15 years, the headmaster continued. "She has an impeccable reputation in academic circles, and her recommendations have helped countless students gain admission to Ivy League universities." "I understand," Ethan said, his voice hollow. That said, Headmaster Collins replaced his glasses. "I find myself in the unusual position of overruling the committee's recommendation." Ethan woke before his alarm the next morning, a mixture of dread and curiosity swirling in his stomach. After the revelations about his family's background, his grandfather had been surprisingly tight-lipped about what exactly he planned to do. All William would say was, "Some lessons can't be taught with words alone." The kitchen was already bustling when Ethan came downstairs. His mother was packing his lunch with extra care, tucking in his favorite oatmeal cookies alongside the usual sandwich and apple. His father sat at the table reading the newspaper, but clearly distracted, his coffee growing cold beside him. "Morning," Ethan said, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. His father looked up. "Your grandfather wants you to meet him at the barn after breakfast." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I need to catch the bus in 20 minutes. "Not today," his father said, folding the newspaper deliberately. "I called the school, told them you'd be a little late for personal reasons. They were surprisingly accommodating." Something in his father's tone made Ethan pause. "Dad, what's going on?" His father exchanged a glance with his mother. "Your grandfather thinks it's time for a different approach to your situation at Oakridge." "What kind of approach?" Ethan asked, his suspicion growing. "Best let him explain," his father said, returning to his newspaper with a finality that indicated the conversation was over. After a quick breakfast, Ethan made his way to the large red barn that housed most of the farm equipment. The massive sliding door was partially open, and inside he could hear his grandfather's voice talking to someone. Stepping through the gap, Ethan froze, his mouth falling open at the sight before him. The center of the barn had been cleared, the tractors and other equipment pushed to the sides. In their place sat a sleek black helicopter, its rotors folded back, the morning light glinting off its polished exterior. On its side, in understated silver lettering, was the Parker Agricultural Innovations logo, a stylized wheat stalk intertwined. With a gear, his grandfather stood beside the helicopter, deep in conversation with a tall woman in a flight suit. They both turned as Ethan entered. "Right on time," William said, with a nod of approval. "Ethan, this is Captain Rodriguez, former Army pilot and now Chief of Aviation for Parker Ag. Sarah, this is my grandson, the one I was telling you about." Captain Rodriguez extended a hand, her grip firm and professional. "Pleasure to meet you, Ethan. Your grandfather speaks highly of you." Ethan shook her hand automatically, his brain still struggling to process the scene. "We have a helicopter and a Chief of Aviation?" William chuckled. "We have 3 helicopters, actually. This is the smallest, our runabout, as I call it. The other 2 are configured for crop monitoring and precision agriculture applications." "But," Ethan gestured vaguely at the gleaming aircraft. "How? Since when?" "Since about 15 years ago," his grandfather said, "when we started scaling the sustainable agriculture methods your great-grandfather pioneered. Turns out there's a pretty big market for organic, ethically produced crops. The Parker method is now used by farming cooperatives in 12 states and 4 countries. Ethan stared at his grandfather, trying to reconcile this new information with the man he'd known his whole life, the same man who wore overalls with patches, who drove a decades-old truck, who seemed the very epitome of a traditional farmer. "Why? Didn't you ever tell me?" he asked finally. William's expression softened. "Because I wanted you to understand the value of hard work before you understood the value of money. I wanted you to appreciate where food comes from, to respect the land and those who work it. Too many people in this world think money appears by magic. They never connect it to actual labor, actual value created." He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "And I wanted you to form your own identity, make your own choices. If you'd known about the business, about the resources available to you, would you have worked as hard in school? Would you have developed the same resilience that led you to stand up to that teacher yesterday?" Ethan considered this, remembering all the early mornings, the calluses, the quiet pride in work completed. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But," his grandfather continued, "I think we might have gone too far in the other direction. Your mother's been saying for years that we should be more open with you about the family business. After what happened yesterday, I'm inclined to agree," he gestured to the helicopter, "which is why we're taking a little field trip this morning. Captain Rodriguez is going to fly us to Oakridge." Ethan's eyes widened. "To school? In this? Grandpa, that's dramatic?" William finished with a glint in his eye. "Maybe so, but sometimes a point needs to be made dramatically to be understood. Dr. Blackwell judged you based on what she thought she knew about farmers. Today, she'll learn that her assumptions were wrong, not just about our family, but about what it means to work the land." 30 minutes later, Ethan found himself strapped into the helicopter's plush leather seat, a noise-cancelling headset over his ears as Captain Rodriguez guided the aircraft smoothly into the sky. Through the window, he watched as their farm receded below them, the geometric patterns of their fields giving way to the suburban developments that ringed Seattle. "First time flying?" his grandfather asked through the headset's intercom. Ethan nodded, his grip tight on the armrests. "You get used to it," William said. "I resisted getting the first helicopter, thought it was too flashy. But when you're managing operations across 3 states, efficiency matters, and Sarah here can get me to our Oregon site in an hour instead of a 5-hour drive." Captain Rodriguez smiled slightly. "Mr. Parker was quite the backseat pilot at first. Took him months to stop telling me how to do my job." "In my defense," William said good-naturedly, "I did design flight systems for Boeing. Old habits die hard." Ethan looked between them, still struggling to integrate this new reality with his understanding of his family. "So all those times you disappeared for days for agricultural conferences?" "I was at agricultural conferences," his grandfather confirmed, "just as the keynote speaker, not an attendee, and sometimes meeting with research universities about partnerships or with retail chains about distribution." He leaned back in his seat. "Your father helps manage the actual farming operations. He's brilliant at it, has a natural sense for the land that you can't learn in any classroom. Your mother handles the financial side. She has an MBA from Wharton, by the way, though. She doesn't broadcast it. Never wanted to make your father feel self-conscious about his different path." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe I never knew any of this." "We kept it quiet deliberately," William said. "Living simply was a choice, not a necessity. Though I admit, perhaps we took the simplicity a bit too far when it came to your school situation." The helicopter banked gently as they approached the Seattle skyline, the Space Needle gleaming in the morning sun. Ethan could see Oakridge Academy. In the distance, its manicured grounds distinct among the surrounding neighborhoods. "We're approaching Oakridge," Captain Rodriguez announced. "I've received clearance to land on their athletic field. Apparently the headmaster is expecting us." Ethan's head snapped toward his grandfather. "Headmaster Collins knows we're coming?" William nodded. "I called him last night after you went to bed. Interesting man. Seems to have a clearer perspective than some of his staff." As the helicopter descended toward the school's sprawling campus, Ethan could see students and teachers pouring out of the buildings, phones raised to capture the unexpected arrival. His stomach clenched as he spotted Dr. Blackwell among them, her silver hair unmistakable even from a distance, her expression a mixture of shock and disapproval. "Grandpa," he said, suddenly uncertain, "are you sure about this? It seems a bit excessive," William finished. "Perhaps, but sometimes people like Dr. Blackwell need a bit of a shock to reconsider their worldview. Not everyone gets the luxury of gradual enlightenment." The helicopter touched down smoothly on the football field, the downwash from its rotors causing the gathered crowd to step back, hands shielding their faces. As the engines powered down, Captain Rodriguez completed her post-landing checks with practiced efficiency. "Whenever you're ready, gentlemen," she said. William straightened his tie. He had changed into a tailored navy suit before they left, though he still wore his familiar work boots beneath it. "Ready, Ethan?" Ethan took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." They emerged from the helicopter to find Headmaster Collins approaching across the field, his expression composed despite the unusual circumstances. Behind him, the student body of Oakridge Academy watched in fascinated silence. A sea of navy, blazers and wide eyes. "Mr. Parker," Collins said, extending his hand to William, "a pleasure to meet you in person. Though I must say, your arrival method is a first for our school." William shook his hand firmly. "Headmaster Collins, thank you for accommodating us on short notice. I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding my grandson's education here." Collins nodded, glancing at Ethan with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Indeed we do. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in my office." "Actually," William said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed field, "I'd prefer to address certain issues more publicly. Some lessons benefit from having an audience." His eyes fixed on Dr. Blackwell, who had made her way to the front of the crowd, her face a mask of professional neutrality, belied by the tight set of her jaw. "Dr. Victoria Blackwell, I presume," William said, walking toward her with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I believe you've made some interesting assumptions about my grandson and our family that I'd like to address." Dr. Blackwell drew herself up, smoothing her already immaculate blazer. "Mr. Parker, while I appreciate your concern for your grandson, I hardly think this dramatic entrance is appropriate for an educational institution. Perhaps we could discuss any issues through proper channels." "Proper channels," William repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Yes, I'm familiar with those. In fact, I serve on the Board of Regents for Cornell University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, my alma mater before MIT. I find that sometimes the proper channels can become so proper that they lose sight of their purpose." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dr. Blackwell blinked rapidly, her composure slipping for the first time. "I understand that yesterday you suggested to my grandson that his background made him unsuitable for the refined environment of Oakridge Academy," William continued, his voice mild but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "That his hands, calloused from actual work, somehow indicated a deficiency in intellect or potential. I never said," Dr. Blackwell began. "You implied it quite clearly," William interrupted. "And you suggested that his rustic background would be an impediment to his success at institutions like Stanford." He smiled slightly. "I found that particularly ironic, given that I serve on Stanford's Agricultural Sciences Advisory Board and endowed a scholarship there specifically for students from farming communities." The murmur grew louder. Ethan saw Madison in the crowd, her eyes wide, a delighted grin spreading across her face. "Mr. Parker," Dr. Blackwell said, her voice strained but diplomatic, "I fear there may have been a misunderstanding. I merely expressed concern that Ethan might struggle with certain social aspects of elite institutions, given his different upbringing." "Different?" William nodded. Yes, his upbringing was certainly different. He learned the value of hard work directly, not through platitudes. He understood the relationship between effort and results before he could tie his shoes. And he developed a respect for the natural world and those who steward it that no theoretical education could provide. He took a step closer to Dr. Blackwell, his voice lowering slightly. "My grandson may not recognize a fish fork at a formal dinner, Dr. Blackwell, that much I'll grant you, but he knows something far more valuable. He knows why the work that puts food on that table matters." Turning to address the gathered students, William continued, "Many of you come from families that have achieved remarkable things. There's no shame in that. Ambition and success should be celebrated. But remember that every fortune, every innovation, every advancement began with someone willing to work with their hands, to solve real problems, to create actual value." He gestured to the helicopter behind him. "Parker Agricultural Innovations began with my father's vision of sustainable farming decades before it became trendy. It grew through my engineering innovations in precision agriculture, and it continues to thrive because of the hands-on expertise of farmers like my son, Ethan's father, who understand the land in ways that no algorithm or textbook can fully capture." Headmaster Collins cleared his throat. Perhaps this would be an excellent opportunity for an impromptu assembly. "Students, please proceed to the auditorium in an orderly fashion. Mr. Parker has graciously agreed to give a brief talk about agricultural innovation and sustainability." He turned to William with a knowing look. "That is, if you wouldn't mind sharing your expertise?" William smiled. "I'd be delighted." As the students began moving toward the main building, Ethan found himself surrounded by classmates peppering him with questions. Madison elbowed her way to his side, laughing. "Your grandfather is amazing," she said. "Did you see Dr. Blackwell's face? I thought she was going to faint when he mentioned MIT and Cornell." Ethan shook his head, still processing everything himself. "I didn't know about any of this until this morning. He never told me." Madison's expression softened. "Why not?" "He wanted me to learn the right lessons first, I guess," Ethan said, watching. As his grandfather chatted easily with Headmaster Collins, the two men walking side by side toward the school. "To understand what really matters before getting caught up in—" He gestured vaguely at the helicopter, the impressed faces of his peers. "The superficial stuff," Madison finished for him. "That's actually pretty wise." Ahead of them, Dr. Blackwell walked stiffly, her back ramrod straight, her gaze fixed forward as whispers and glances followed her. For the first time, Ethan felt a twinge of sympathy for her. Having your worldview publicly dismantled couldn't be pleasant. As if sensing his thoughts, his grandfather paused, allowing Dr. Blackwell to catch up to him. Whatever he said to her was too quiet for Ethan to hear, but he saw her nod slowly, her expression shifting from defensive to thoughtful. After a moment, she extended her hand, which William shook without hesitation. The assembly that followed was unlike any Ethan had experienced at Oakridge. His grandfather spoke not about wealth or status, but about innovation, sustainability, and the dignity of meaningful work. He talked about global food security challenges and how traditional farming wisdom combined with cutting-edge technology could address them. Throughout, he wove in stories about the farm, the same farm where Ethan had grown up, portrayed not as a humble plot of land, but as a living laboratory for agricultural advancement. When William opened the floor for questions, hands shot up. Across the auditorium, students who had never given Ethan a second glance now listened intently as his grandfather fielded questions about regenerative agriculture, carbon sequestration, and the economic viability of small-scale farming in a world dominated by agribusiness giants. And then, surprisingly, Dr. Blackwell raised her hand. The auditorium fell silent as William called on her. "Mr. Parker," she said, her voice steady despite the scrutiny, "you've spoken eloquently about combining traditional knowledge with technological innovation. I wonder if you might address how educational institutions like Oakridge can better bridge similar divides between theoretical knowledge and practical application, between different types of intelligence and experience." William regarded her thoughtfully. "That's an excellent question, Dr. Blackwell, and one that gets to the heart of what education should be." For the next few minutes, he spoke about the false dichotomy between academic and practical knowledge, about how the most transformative innovations often came from those who could bridge different worlds, different perspectives. "The greatest mistake we can make as educators or parents," he concluded, "is to confuse privilege with potential, or to mistake one type of knowledge for the only type that matters." When the assembly ended, Ethan found himself walking alongside his grandfather back toward the helicopter, where Captain Rodriguez waited patiently. "You're not staying?" Ethan asked, surprised. William shook his head. "I have a meeting in Portland this afternoon, Board of Directors for a Sustainable Forestry Initiative." He smiled at Ethan's expression. "Your father will pick you up after school, regular time." "Grandpa," Ethan hesitated. "Why did you do all this? It seemed like a lot." William's expression grew serious. "Because some lessons need to be taught dramatically to be remembered, not just for Dr. Blackwell, but for everyone watching. And for you, Ethan. Me. Yes." William placed his hands on Ethan's shoulders. I wanted you to understand that you never need to apologize for who you are or where you come from. Being a farmer, a real farmer, not the caricature that people like Dr. Blackwell imagine, is something to be proud of. It's vital, essential work that connects you to the earth and to every person who eats the food you help grow. He squeezed Ethan's shoulders gently. But I also wanted you to see that you're not limited by anyone's perception of what a farmer's grandson can become. The world is larger and more complex than the narrow slice of it represented at schools, like Oakridge. Remember that, Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. I will. As his grandfather boarded the helicopter, Ethan stepped back, watching as the rotors began to spin, stirring the air into a small tempest. The sleek machine lifted gracefully into the sky, banking toward the distant mountains before disappearing into the blue expanse. Behind him, Ethan heard a familiar voice. "Mr. Parker." He turned to find Dr. Blackwell standing a few paces away, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "Dr. Blackwell," he acknowledged, bracing himself for whatever might come next. "I owe you an apology," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "Not just for yesterday, but for my attitude toward you since you arrived at Oakridge." Ethan remained silent, waiting. "Your grandfather is a remarkable man," she continued. "He reminded me of something I seem to have forgotten over the years, that education is about expanding horizons, not reinforcing boundaries." She met his eyes directly. "I was wrong about you and about what your background signifies. I hope you can accept my apology." Ethan considered her words, remembering his grandfather's conversation with her earlier. Whatever William had said had clearly made an impact. "I accept your apology," he said finally, "and I apologize for walking out yesterday. That was disrespectful, regardless of the circumstances." Dr. Blackwell nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Your European history paper on agrarian reforms during the Enlightenment is due next week. I'll be interested to see your perspective on how agricultural innovation shaped political developments." "I'll make sure it's thorough," Ethan said, returning her smile cautiously. "I have no doubt," she replied. "And Mr. Parker, if you're still considering Stanford, I would be happy to write you a recommendation letter. Your grandfather mentioned their agricultural sciences program is among the best in the world." As Dr. Blackwell walked away, Ethan turned to see Madison approaching, trailed by a group of curious classmates. "So," she said, bumping his shoulder with hers, "turns out the farm boy is actually farming royalty. Who knew?" Ethan laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. "Not me, apparently." "Seriously, though," Madison said, lowering her voice, "are you okay? This is a lot to process in one day." Ethan looked up at the sky where his grandfather's helicopter had disappeared, then back at the school where classmates who had once ignored him now waited eagerly to talk to him. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Yeah," he said finally, "I'm okay. I'm just thinking about something my grandpa said about lessons that need to be taught dramatically." Madison raised an eyebrow. "And what lesson did you learn today?" Ethan smiled. "That respect isn't based on what you own or where you come from. It's earned through who you are and what you stand for." He paused. "And sometimes it helps to have a helicopter." The weeks following the helicopter incident, as it came to be known throughout Oakridge Academy, brought changes that Ethan could never have anticipated. The most immediate was his newfound visibility. Overnight, he had transformed. From the overlooked farm boy to someone everyone wanted to know. Students who had previously ignored him now greeted him in the hallways, asked to sit with him at lunch, invited him to study groups and weekend gatherings. The attention was both flattering and disorienting. Part of him enjoyed finally being accepted, but another part, the part shaped by his grandfather's values, recognized the hollowness of acceptance based on the revelation of wealth and status rather than who he truly was. "Funny how a helicopter changes people's perception," he remarked to Madison one afternoon as they sat beneath an oak tree on the school grounds, watching a group of students glance their way for the third time in 10 minutes. Madison snorted. "You think that's something? Brittany Reynolds asked me if you might want to go to the winter formal with her. Brittany, who literally pretended not to hear you when you asked to borrow a pencil in calculus last month." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "The world's a strange place." "So," Madison nudged him, "are you going to say yes to Brittany?" "Absolutely not," Ethan said without hesitation. "I'm planning to ask someone who was kind to me before the helicopter, someone who defended me to Dr. Blackwell even when it might have gotten her in trouble." Madison's cheeks flushed slightly. "I didn't do anything special. Just what any decent person would do." "But that's the thing," Ethan said, his voice softening. "Decency isn't actually that common. Neither is the courage to stand up for what's right when it's easier to stay silent." The transformation in Dr. Blackwell was perhaps the most surprising change of all. While not exactly warm, she had become scrupulously fair in her treatment of all students, particularly those from less privileged backgrounds. She even initiated a new seminar series on global agricultural systems, inviting Ethan's grandfather as the inaugural speaker. At home, things had shifted as well. The pretense of being just a modest farming family had been dropped, though the values of hard work and humility remained firmly in place. Ethan's parents began including him in discussions about the business, the challenges of scaling sustainable practices, the research partnerships with universities, the ongoing battle against agricultural conglomerates that prioritized profit over environmental stewardship. One evening, as Ethan helped his father repair an irrigation pump, a task they could easily have delegated to one of the company's maintenance teams, he broached the subject that had been on his mind since the helicopter revelation. "Dad," he said, handing over a wrench, "are you ever bothered that Grandpa has all these impressive degrees and you didn't go to college?" His father paused, wiping his hands on a rag as he considered the question. "There was a time when it bothered me," he admitted. "Right after high school, when all my friends were heading off to college and I chose to stay on the farm. I wondered if I was making a mistake. What changed?" "I realized something important," his father said, sitting back. On his heels, education doesn't just happen in classrooms. Your grandfather taught me everything he knew about agricultural science, engineering principles, soil chemistry, but he also respected that I was learning things through direct experience that he couldn't teach me." He gestured to the fields, stretching out before them, bathed in the golden light of sunset. "You can study farming in textbooks all your life, but there's a wisdom that comes only from working with the land, day after day, season after season, feeling the soil between your fingers, watching how plants respond to different conditions, developing an instinct for when a crop needs attention." "So you don't regret not going to college?" Ethan asked. His father smiled. "I didn't say that. I sometimes wish I'd had the experience, the formal training to complement what I learned hands-on. That's why your mother and I have always been so adamant about your education." He squeezed Ethan's shoulder. "But I've never regretted choosing this life. It's brought me more satisfaction than I could have found anywhere else." As autumn gave way to winter, Ethan's life settled into a new rhythm. At school, the initial frenzy of attention gradually subsided, leaving behind a few genuine friendships alongside the more superficial connections. His relationship with Madison deepened, built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than the social calculations that characterized many Oakridge romances. His academic work took on new dimensions as well. Inspired by his grandfather's example, Ethan began exploring the intersection of traditional agricultural knowledge and cutting-edge technology. For his science project, he developed a small-scale sensor system that monitored soil conditions in real time, transmitting data to a smartphone application he coded himself. The project earned him not only top marks, but also the respect of teachers, who had previously underestimated him. Mr. Jenkins, the computer science teacher, even suggested he submit the project to a national competition for young innovators. "You've got a real talent for bridging worlds, Parker," Jenkins told him. "You understand the practical challenges farmers face, but you also have the technical skills to create solutions." That's rare. On a crisp December morning, Ethan received a thick envelope in the mail from Stanford University. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it in the kitchen, his parents watching with barely contained excitement. "Dear Mr. Parker," he read aloud, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Stanford University's School of Earth, Energy and Environmental Sciences under our Early Action Program." His mother's joyful cry interrupted his reading as she embraced him, followed quickly by his father. The rest of the letter detailed his scholarship, a combination of academic merit and the Parker Agricultural Innovation Fellowship his grandfather had established years earlier. "I can't believe it," Ethan said, stunned. "I mean, I hoped, but—" "We never doubted you for a second," his father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not once." Later that evening, Ethan drove to his grandfather's house, not the modest farmhouse where he'd spent so much time growing up, but the sleek, contemporary home nestled against the foothills that William had built after his wife passed away. It was elegant yet unpretentious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the spectacular mountain views and an extensive greenhouse where William conducted his personal agricultural experiments. His grandfather was in his study, surrounded by agricultural journals, technical manuals, and a large topographical map of their latest acquisition in Oregon. He looked up as Ethan entered, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "Stanford?" he asked simply. Ethan nodded. "How did you know?" "The mail comes earlier to my house than yours," William said with a wink. "And I might have made a call or two to check on the status of your application. You didn't pull strings, did you?" Ethan asked, suddenly concerned. William's expression grew serious. "Absolutely not. I would never undermine your achievements that way. Did I make sure your application received a fair reading without prejudice about your background? Yes. Did I influence the decision? No." He held Ethan's gaze. "You earned this on your own merit, grandson." "Never doubt that." Relief washed over Ethan. "Thank you for that and for everything else." William gestured for him to sit in the leather chair opposite his desk. "You know, watching you these past few months has reminded me why I made the choices I did, about the business, about raising your father, about how we approached your education." "What do you mean?" "I've seen you navigate a challenging situation with dignity and integrity," William said. "The helicopter day could have changed you, made you arrogant or entitled. Instead, you've remained grounded, literally and figuratively." He chuckled at his own pun. "You've continued doing your chores, maintained your scholarship, formed genuine friendships, rather than exploiting your new social capital." "I had good teachers," Ethan said simply. William nodded. "Perhaps. But you also have something that can't be taught, character." He leaned forward. "Which is why I'd like to discuss your future with the company." "My future?" Ethan echoed, surprised. "But I'm just starting college. Planning ahead has always been a Parker trait," William said. "Parker Agricultural Innovations is more than a business. It's a mission to transform farming practices globally, to balance productivity with sustainability, profit with ethics." His eyes took on a distant look. "My father laid the foundation. I built the structure. Your father has expanded and refined it, but the next phase will require someone who can bridge even more worlds. Science and technology, yes, but also policy, global development, climate adaptation. "And you think that could be me?" Ethan asked, incredulous. "I think it could be, if you want it to be," William said carefully. "But that's not a decision you need to make now, or even in the next few years. College is a time for exploration, for discovering your passions and purpose." He smiled. "Just know that whatever path you choose, whether it leads back to this farm or to somewhere entirely different, your family will support you fully." Ethan felt the weight of his grandfather's words, not as pressure, but as possibility. "I'll remember that." As he drove back home under a canopy of stars, Ethan reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past months. From the humiliation in Dr. Blackwell's classroom, to the triumph of his Stanford acceptance, from the revelation of his family's true circumstances, to the deeper understanding of what really mattered. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to protect him from the potential corrupting influence of wealth and status, his family had inadvertently subjected him to the sting of prejudice and exclusion. Yet that very experience had shaped him in ways that might otherwise have been impossible, teaching him empathy, resilience, and the ability to see beyond superficial markers of worth. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the farm blanketed in a light dusting of frost that made everything sparkle in the early light. Ethan rose before sunrise, as he had every day since childhood, and made his way to the barn to begin his chores. The familiar routine, feeding the animals, checking equipment, helping his father plan the day's work, grounded him amid the swirl of changes in his life. As he worked, he noticed a sleek black car pulling up the long driveway, a rare sight on their rural property, especially at this hour. From it emerged Dr. Blackwell, looking somewhat out of place in her tailored coat and polished boots as she picked her way carefully across the frosty ground. "Dr. Blackwell," Ethan said, setting down the feed bucket in his hands. "This is unexpected." "Good morning, Mr. Parker," she replied, her breath visible in the cold air. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to deliver this personally." She held out an envelope bearing the Stanford seal, an official recommendation letter, he realized. "You drove all the way out here for this?" Ethan asked, surprised by the gesture. Dr. Blackwell's expression softened slightly. "Actually, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. I've been developing a new curriculum for Oakridge, one that integrates practical experience with traditional academics. Internships, field studies, hands-on projects alongside theoretical learning." "That sounds innovative," Ethan said, "especially for Oakridge." "It's long overdue," she acknowledged. "And I was hoping your family might consider partnering with us, allowing students to visit the farm, learn about sustainable agriculture firsthand, perhaps even offering some mentorship." Ethan couldn't help but smile at the irony. "I think my grandfather would be very interested in that conversation," he said. "He's always believed in bridging different types of knowledge." "As I'm learning to," Dr. Blackwell said, a hint of humility in her voice that would have been unimaginable months ago. "The world is changing rapidly, Mr. Parker. The skills and perspectives our students will need are evolving. Those who can navigate different environments, who understand both theory and practice, they're the ones who will thrive." Ethan nodded, thinking of his grandfather's words about the next phase of their family business. "I couldn't agree more." As they walked toward the house, where he knew his mother would insist on offering Dr. Blackwell coffee and breakfast, despite the early hour, Ethan felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with humiliation and exclusion was closing with recognition and respect, not because of his family's wealth or status, but because of the values they represented and the bridge they could help build between different worlds. The helicopter incident had indeed taught a dramatic lesson, but perhaps not the one that had seemed most obvious at first glance. It wasn't about wealth or status or showing up one's detractors. It was about breaking down false barriers, challenging limiting assumptions, and recognizing that true education, like true respect, transcended superficial markers of worth. As they reached the farmhouse door, Ethan paused, looking back at the fields stretching toward the horizon, fields that represented not just his family's livelihood, but a vision for a more sustainable future. In that moment, he understood with perfect clarity that whatever path he chose, he would carry forward the most important legacy his family had given him, not their success or resources, but their unwavering belief that meaningful work, done with integrity and purpose, was the ultimate measure of a life well lived, and that was a lesson worth more than any helicopter could ever convey. Spring arrived at Oakridge Academy with a burst of cherry blossoms and renewed energy. For Ethan, the final months of his senior year unfolded in ways he could never have imagined back in the fall. The Parker Agricultural Innovation Partnership with the school had evolved from Dr. Blackwell's initial suggestion into a full-fledged program, with weekly field trips to the farm for students taking the new agricultural sciences elective. Ethan found himself in the unexpected role of peer instructor, guiding classmates who had once looked down on him through the basics of soil, testing sustainable irrigation techniques, and drone-assisted crop monitoring. The irony wasn't lost on him. These same students who had mocked his calloused hands now eagerly donned work gloves and boots to trudge through the fields alongside him. "You're a natural teacher," his grandfather remarked one afternoon watching from the greenhouse doorway as Ethan demonstrated grafting techniques to a group of attentive seniors. "You have the patience for it," Ethan smiled, carefully binding the newly joined plant sections. "I guess I had good examples to follow." The transformation extended beyond just Ethan standing among his peers. Oakridge itself was changing, albeit slowly. Dr. Blackwell, surprisingly, had become the champion of what she called experiential integration, the incorporation of practical, hands-on learning alongside traditional academics. Her European history course now included modules on agricultural revolutions throughout time and their impacts on political systems, bringing Ethan's earlier insights full circle. Headmaster Collins had embraced the changes, recognizing that Oakridge needed to evolve to truly prepare students for a rapidly changing world. The universities are increasingly looking for applicants with multidimensional experiences, he explained at a faculty meeting that Ethan had been invited to address. Theory and practice, academics and application, the future belongs to those who can navigate both realms. Not everyone welcomed the new direction. Some traditionalist teachers and parents worried about diluting academic rigor or vocational drift. But when 3 Oakridge seniors, including Ethan, swept the regional science fair with their agricultural technology innovations, earning attention from major universities and tech companies, the skeptics found themselves increasingly marginalized. For Ethan personally, perhaps the most meaningful change was in his relationship with Madison. What had begun as a supportive friendship had blossomed into something deeper. Unlike the calculated social maneuvering that characterized many Oakridge romances, theirs was built on genuine connection and shared values. "You know," Madison said, one evening as they sat on the Parker farmhouse porch, watching the sunset paint the fields gold, "I've been thinking about changing my major." "Oh?" Ethan looked up from the college course catalog they'd been reviewing. With Stanford for him and UCLA for her, they were trying to coordinate breaks and visit opportunities for the coming year. "I was set on pre-med because, well, that's what my family does. 3 generations of surgeons." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But these past months, working on the Sustainable Agriculture Project, I've been thinking about environmental medicine instead." "The intersection of ecosystem health and human health?" Ethan asked. Madison nodded. "Exactly. How agricultural practices, affect public health outcomes, how climate change impacts disease patterns, how sustainable food systems can address health inequities. Her eyes lit up as she spoke. I could still follow the medical path, but focus on preventative and environmental approaches rather than just treating illness after it happens. Ethan smiled, recognizing in her the same passion for bridging worlds that his grandfather had identified in him. I think that's brilliant, and if you wanted to do any research on the relationships between regenerative farming practices and community health outcomes, I know a farm that might be perfect. She finished, laughing. As graduation approached, Ethan found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of his senior year. The Parker Agricultural Innovation Scholarship, a new initiative his grandfather had announced at the Oakridge Spring Benefit, would now send one graduating senior each year to study sustainable agriculture or related fields. The first recipient was Colin Mendez, a brilliant student from a working-class background who might otherwise have had to abandon his environmental science dreams for a more immediately lucrative major. "You inspired this, you know," William told Ethan after the scholarship announcement. "Watching your journey this year made me realize how many other talented young people might be facing similar barriers, either financial obstacles or social prejudices about what kinds of work are valued." The night before graduation, the Parker farm hosted a celebration for Ethan's close friends and supporters. Under strings of lights hung between the barn and the old oak tree, tables were set up for an outdoor dinner featuring produce grown on the farm. Dr. Blackwell attended, as did Headmaster Collins and several of Ethan's teachers and classmates. The contrast between this gathering and Ethan's social isolation at the beginning of the year could not have been more striking. Yet what moved him most wasn't the presence of people who had once ignored him, but the genuine connections that had formed once artificial barriers fell away. After dinner, as twilight deepened into evening, Ethan's grandfather clinked his glass. And for attention, the conversation quieted as William stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the barn lights. "I'm not one for long speeches," he began, "but some occasions call for a few words. Tonight, we celebrate not just Ethan's graduation, but the power of challenging assumptions, our own and others." He looked around the gathering, his gaze lingering briefly on Dr. Blackwell. "When I arrived at Oakridge in that helicopter months ago, I intended to teach a lesson about appearances and prejudice. What I didn't expect was how much all of us would learn in return." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "This farm has been in our family for 4 generations, William continued. "Each generation has faced different challenges, from the Dust Bowl that my father navigated to the corporate agriculture battles of my era. But each generation has also found new ways to bridge seemingly separate worlds: traditional knowledge and scientific innovation, environmental stewardship and economic viability, rural wisdom and academic insight." He turned to Ethan. "My grandson reminded me this year that bridges must be built from both sides. It's not enough to know you're right. You must also create pathways for understanding. Ethan did that at Oakridge in ways both small and profound." Ethan felt a lump in his throat as his grandfather continued. "And so, as Ethan prepares to carry these lessons to Stanford and beyond, I'm pleased to announce another initiative, the Oakridge Parker Field Station." William gestured toward the eastern edge of the property. "We'll be breaking ground next month on a research and teaching facility where students from elementary school through university level can engage with sustainable agriculture firsthand. The station will include laboratories, demonstration fields, and residential facilities for student researchers." Gasps and excited murmurs erupted around the tables. Dr. Blackwell looked particularly stunned in the best possible way. "Education isn't just about classrooms or books or even laboratories," William said as the excitement settled. "It's about connecting ideas to reality, theory to practice, past wisdom to future innovation. It's about recognizing that knowledge comes in many forms, each valuable in its own right. He raised his glass, to bridges between worlds and to those brave enough to cross them. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed with renewed energy, Ethan found himself momentarily overwhelmed. Madison slipped her hand into his beneath the table, anchoring him with her quiet support. "You okay?" she whispered. He nodded, watching. His grandfather deep in animated conversation with Dr. Blackwell about the field station curriculum. Just trying to take it all in. 6 months ago, I was just trying to survive Oakridge without losing my scholarship. Now you're changing it, Madison finished for him, and it's changing you. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Ethan walked alone to the highest point on the farm, a gentle hill that overlooked the entire valley. The lights of Seattle glimmered in the distance, while closer at hand, the farmhouse and barns formed a small constellation of their own against the darkness. He thought about the journey ahead, Stanford, with its world-class professors and cutting-edge research. The internships his grandfather had suggested at agricultural technology startups and international development organizations. The eventual return to Parker Agricultural Innovations, not as just the heir to a successful business, but as someone who could help transform the future of farming globally. But more than that, he thought about the journey behind him. The humiliation in Dr. Blackwell's classroom that had felt like an ending, but had actually been a beginning. The helicopter day that had revealed not just his family's success, but the values that truly mattered. The quiet conversations with his father about different forms of knowledge, with his grandfather about bridging worlds, with Madison about finding purpose at the intersection of seemingly separate paths. As a cool breeze stirred the new leaves on the trees around him, Ethan realized something profound. The most valuable education he'd received hadn't come from Oakridge's prestigious classrooms, or even from Stanford's promised opportunities. It had come from navigating the space between different worlds, between privilege and work, between theory and practice, between appearance and reality. In that space, he had found not just his voice, but his vision. And that, perhaps, was the greatest transformation of all. 4 years later, Ethan stood on the stage of Stanford University's outdoor amphitheater, the weight of graduation regalia heavy on his shoulders despite the perfect California sunshine. As valedictorian of the School of Earth, Energy and Environmental Sciences, he gazed out at the sea of faces, classmates who had become research partners and lifelong friends, professors who had challenged and mentored him, and in the front rows, the family who had shaped his path even before he understood its direction. His parents beamed with unmistakable pride. His father, Mark, wore a suit that couldn't quite disguise the farmer in him. His weathered hands and the subtle way he shifted, more comfortable in fields than formal settings. His mother, elegant in a blue dress, dabbed occasionally at her eyes. And there was his grandfather, William, now 86, but still commanding in his presence, nodding encouragingly as Ethan approached the microphone. 4 years ago, Ethan began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, I arrived at Stanford believing I understood the purpose of education. I thought it was about acquiring knowledge, developing expertise, preparing for a career. He paused, looking across the faces of his fellow graduates. I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't entirely right either. The journey through Stanford had been even more transformative than he'd anticipated. What had begun as a straightforward path in agricultural sciences had evolved into a double major in environmental systems engineering and public policy, with a focus on sustainable food systems. His senior thesis on integrating indigenous farming practices with modern technology had won national recognition and was already being implemented as a pilot program in 3 countries. True education, Ethan continued, isn't just about what we learn, but about how we learn to see the world and our place in it. It's about recognizing connections between fields that seem separate, finding common ground between traditions that appear opposed, and building bridges where others see only divides. From his vantage point, he could see Madison in the family section, having flown in from UCLA, where she was finishing her first year of medical school with a specialization in environmental health. Their relationship had deepened despite the distance, strengthened by shared values and complementary visions. For the future, my grandfather taught me something important long before I came to Stanford, Ethan said, meeting William's eyes. He taught me that knowledge without purpose is hollow, that innovation without values is dangerous, and that the most important bridges we build aren't technological, they're human. The Oakridge Parker Field Station had flourished over the past 4 years, expanding from a local educational resource to a nationally recognized center for sustainable agriculture research and education. Dr. Blackwell, surprisingly, had left Oakridge Academy to become its full-time director, bringing with her a passion for interdisciplinary learning that had transformed both the program and her own approach to education. The challenges we face as a generation, climate change, food security, resource depletion, social inequality, cannot be solved by expertise alone, Ethan continued. They require us to bridge divides between science and policy, between technology and ethics, between innovation and tradition. During his time at Stanford, Ethan had witnessed the continued transformation of Parker agricultural innovations. Under his father's steady leadership and his grandfather's visionary guidance, the company had expanded its sustainable farming initiatives across 5 continents. Their regenerative agriculture methods were now being adopted by farming communities, from Nebraska to Nigeria, proving that environmental stewardship and economic viability could go hand in hand. As we leave this campus today, Ethan said, we carry with us not just degrees, but responsibilities, to use our knowledge in service of something larger than ourselves, to recognize wisdom in unexpected places, to build bridges where others erect walls. He thought back to that pivotal moment in Dr. Blackwell's classroom years ago, the humiliation that had led, through an extraordinary chain of events, to transformation. How different would his path have been without that conflict, without the helicopter day that followed, without the revelations and reconciliations that had expanded his understanding of both his family's legacy and his own potential. There's a story in my family, Ethan shared, his voice softening with personal reflection, about my great-grandfather returning from Cornell University to a small farm in Washington state during the Great Depression. When asked why he would waste his Ivy League education on farming, he supposedly said, "Because feeding people isn't a waste of anything." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience. That same spirit of applying the highest levels of knowledge to fundamental human needs, of bridging theoretical understanding with practical action, is what I hope we all carry forward, regardless of our chosen fields. After the ceremony, amid the swirl of celebration and photographs, Ethan found a moment alone with his grandfather. They stood slightly apart from the crowd, watching as family members and friends mingled on the sun-dappled lawn. "Proud of you, son," William said simply, his voice gruff with emotion, "not just for the honors or the degree, for the man you've become." Ethan nodded, words momentarily beyond him. The relationship between them had deepened during his Stanford years. William had visited often, sometimes arriving in the helicopter that had become something of a family joke, but more often driving up in his old truck for weekend visits, where they would discuss everything from cutting-edge agricultural technology to philosophical questions about humanity's relationship with the natural world. "I've been thinking," William said after a comfortable silence, "about succession planning." Ethan turned to look at him. "For the company?" William nodded. I'll be stepping back from day-to-day operations next year. Your father will take over as CEO, as we've always planned, but we've created a new position I think might interest you once you've completed that Fulbright year in East Africa." "What position?" Ethan asked, though he had a suspicion. "Director of Innovation and Sustainability," William said. "Overseeing our research partnerships, international development initiatives, and policy advocacy work. Building bridges, as you put it so eloquently in your speech." He smiled. "Though I'll understand if you have other plans. The offers from those tech startups in Silicon Valley are impressive." Ethan had indeed received several lucrative job offers. His combination of technical expertise, policy understanding, and hands-on agricultural knowledge made him an attractive candidate for companies working on everything from vertical farming to precision agriculture software. But the pull of the family legacy remained strong, especially as he'd watched Parker Agricultural Innovations evolve from a successful business into a global force for sustainable food systems. "I'd like to come home," Ethan said simply. "After the Fulbright, there's work to be done." William's eyes brightened. "The Parker method continues, then?" "With some new bridges," Ethan added with a smile. Later that evening, the family gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking San Francisco Bay. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from Ethan's upcoming move to Tanzania for his Fulbright research, to Madison's latest studies on agricultural worker health outcomes, to the expanding educational programs at the field station. As glasses were raised for a toast, Ethan found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that autumn morning in Dr. Blackwell's classroom to this moment of transition. The helicopter incident had become family lore now, a story told with a mixture of amusement and thoughtfulness about appearances versus reality, about prejudice and its undoing, about dramatic gestures and deeper truths. To Ethan, his father said, raising his glass, "And to new horizons." "To bridges between worlds," his grandfather added, echoing his toast from that pre-graduation dinner 4 years earlier. Madison, sitting beside Ethan, leaned close to whisper, "To the farm boy who changed more than just himself." As the summer sun began its descent toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Ethan thought about legacy. Not just the business his great-grandfather had begun and his grandfather had transformed, but the values that had flowed through generations. The belief in meaningful work, the commitment to stewardship of the land, the understanding that true wealth lay not in possessions or status, but in purpose and connection. The helicopter that had landed so dramatically at Oakridge Academy years ago had indeed taught a lesson, but not the one that might have seemed most obvious at first glance. It wasn't about wealth or status, or even proving others wrong. It was about the courage to challenge assumptions, the wisdom to value different kinds of knowledge, and the vision to build bridges where others saw only divides. That was the true Parker legacy. And as Ethan looked around at the people who had shaped his journey, family by blood and family by choice, he knew it was a legacy that would continue to evolve and grow, connecting past wisdom to future innovation, just as surely as seeds planted in well-tended soil would rise toward the sun. In the end, the most important lesson hadn't come from Oakridge Academy or even Stanford University. It had come from a farm where generations had worked the land with both hands and minds, understanding that the most valuable growth wasn't measured in profit margins or academic honors, but in the flourishing of both people and planet. That was a harvest worth nurturing, season after season, generation after generation. And Ethan Parker, once dismissed as just a farmer's son, was ready to carry that legacy forward, one bridge at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.